The fluorescent lights of the train station flickered above me as I sat on my worn suitcase, watching the digital clock tick past 11 p.m. My phone had died an hour ago, or rather, I'd let it die. Around me, the crowd had thinned to almost nothing. Just a few late-night travelers and a janitor pushing a mop across the grimy floor. I knew exactly what was happening. 20 miles away, my brother Chen was at some bar, laughing with his friends, his phone silenced in his pocket. He'd forgotten to pick me up. Again. Except this time, I'd known he would. The 11:47 train to Shanghai was boarding at platform 3. I could see it through the window, sleek and silver, promising escape. In my previous life, I'd waited until 3 a.m. before finally calling home, sobbing, begging someone, anyone, to remember I existed. My mother had been annoyed at being woken up. My father had shouted that I was 18, I should figure it out myself. Chen had laughed when he finally showed up at dawn, reeking of alcohol, saying he'd totally spaced. I'd forgiven them. I always forgave them. But I died at 23, alone in a hospital room while my family celebrated Chen's engagement party across town. And somehow, by some cosmic mercy or curse, I'd woken up on my 18th birthday, given a second chance to rewrite everything. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I stood up, grabbed my suitcase, and walked toward platform 3. The ticket I'd bought this afternoon, the one I'd never purchased in my first life, was tucked safely in my pocket. One way to Shanghai. No return date. Behind me, my old life waited. Ahead, the train doors stood open, beckoning. I didn't look back. To understand why that moment mattered, you need to know what my family was, what they'd always been. I was born Lin Shu, the second child and only daughter of the Lin family. My brother Chen was 3 years older, and from the moment he drew breath, the sun rose and set on his existence. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me. I told myself that for years. It was just that Chen was the son, the heir, the future of our family's small but profitable textile business. I was extra, decorative at best, burdensome at worst. My earliest memory was my 5th birthday. There was no party. Chen had a soccer tournament that day, so the whole family went to cheer for him instead. I spent the afternoon with our elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Wang, who baked me a small cake and sang to me in her creaky voice. When my family came home that evening, flushed with victory because Chen's team had won, my mother noticed the cake. "Oh," she said. "Was that today?" That set the pattern for the next 18 years. Chen got piano lessons with the city's best instructor. I taught myself from YouTube videos on an old electronic keyboard Mrs. Wang bought at a yard sale. Chen got new clothes each season. I wore his hand-me-downs and whatever I could afford from thrift stores with the tiny allowance I earned from doing extra chores. Chen went to expensive cram schools. I studied in the public library until closing, then under streetlights when I missed my bus home. My parents weren't poor. My father's textile factory did well enough that we lived in a large house in a good neighborhood. They weren't poor, they just didn't see the point in investing in a daughter. "You'll get married anyway," my mother would say whenever I asked for anything. "Why waste money on you?" Chen was different, though. In my first life, I'd thought he at least saw me as a person. He'd joke with me sometimes, let me hang out with him and his friends occasionally, even defended me once when a classmate was bullying me. I'd loved him desperately, the way you love someone who gives you scraps when you're starving. But in my first life, I learned the truth too late. It was Chen who'd systematically sabotaged every opportunity I'd managed to scrape together. When I'd gotten into a good university on scholarship, he'd accidentally spilled coffee on my acceptance letter and enrollment papers the morning they were due, forcing me to miss the deadline. When I'd landed an internship at a marketing firm, he'd called them pretending to be a reference and told them I had a history of theft. When I'd started dating someone who actually treated me kindly, Chen had shown him fabricated evidence of me cheating. Every time I tried to climb out of the hole they'd dug for me, Chen shoved me back down, and he smiled while doing it. Why, I'd wondered in my first life, crying myself to sleep in my tiny apartment after I'd been evicted because Chen had borrowed my rent money and never paid it back. I'd figured it out eventually in those final days in the hospital. Chen wasn't just indifferent or careless. He was threatened. Because despite everything, despite the neglect and the hand-me-downs and the constant dismissal, I'd still managed to be good at things. My grades were higher than his. My piano playing was more beautiful. My art won competitions. I did all of this with scraps while he had everything, and he couldn't stand it. If I ever got real opportunities, real resources, I might outshine him, and that was unacceptable. So he made sure I never got the chance. My parents enabled it because they didn't care enough to look closely. When Chen needed bail money after a drunk driving incident, they liquidated my college fund without asking. When his business venture failed, they took out a loan against the house I'd been promised a share in as my inheritance. When he got engaged to a wealthy girl whose father could benefit the family business, they threw a lavish party that cost more than I'd seen in my entire life. I wasn't invited to help plan it. I was told to serve drinks. That was the night before I died. I'd gone home from that party, my heart hollow, and collapsed in my apartment. A brain aneurysm, the doctor said later. Genetic. Nothing anyone could have done. Except Chen was the emergency contact on my hospital forms, and he didn't come. Neither did anyone else. I died watching the door, waiting for family that never arrived. When I woke up on the morning of my 18th birthday, I'd screamed. Then I'd cried. Then I'd laughed until I couldn't breathe. Because I remembered everything. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every moment of hope crushed under their indifference. And now I had the chance to do it differently. The knowledge of my rebirth came with something else too, a clarity I'd never had before. I could see the patterns now, the thousand small ways they'd trained me to accept less, to expect nothing, to be grateful for scraps. I could see exactly how Chen operated, how my parents functioned, where every trap was laid. And I knew something they didn't. I knew I didn't need them. I'd never needed them. In my first life, I'd spent 5 years after high school, the years between 18 and 23, struggling in our hometown, trying to make them love me, trying to prove I mattered. Those 5 years had been wasted. But I remembered something else from my first life. At age 21, when I'd finally given up and moved to Shanghai with the last of my savings, I'd flourished. Away from my family's shadow, I'd gotten a job at a marketing firm, gotten promoted quickly, started building a life. It was too little, too late. The damage was done, my health was failing. But I'd been good at it. I'd been happy. This time I would skip straight to that part. This time, I wouldn't waste 5 years waiting for them to care. The train station abandonment was supposed to happen like this. I was meant to take the train home from my high school graduation ceremony in the city. Chen was supposed to pick me up at our hometown station at 9 p.m. In my first life, I'd waited and waited, calling him over and over, until finally giving up and taking a taxi I couldn't afford. The next day, when I'd timidly mentioned he'd forgotten me, he'd laughed. "You should have just taken a cab, dummy. Why make such a big deal?" My parents had agreed. I was being dramatic, needy, typical me, making something out of nothing. But this time, I'd planned differently. I'd started preparations 3 months before graduation. While pretending to be the same meek, desperate for approval daughter they expected, I'd been methodically building my escape. First, I'd retrieved information only I could know. In my first life, I'd learned that Aunt May, my father's estranged older sister, had left home decades ago after a fight with my grandparents about her choice to pursue a business career instead of marriage. My parents never spoke to her, treated her like she didn't exist. In my previous life, I'd only learned about her at my father's funeral when she'd appeared, wealthy and elegant, to pay her respects. She'd looked at me with something like pity and slipped me her business card. I'd been too deep in grief and poverty to follow up. This time, I'd reached out to her 2 months ago using the contact information I'd memorized from that card in another life. I'd sent a carefully worded email explaining who I was and asking, humbly, if she had any advice for a young woman trying to start a career. She'd responded within hours. We'd been corresponding ever since, and she'd been remarkably generous with her guidance. She didn't know about the rebirth, of course, I wasn't that foolish, but she seemed to recognize something in my situation that resonated with her own past. She'd offered me a job as an assistant in her marketing firm in Shanghai, pending graduation. Room and board included until I got on my feet. "Your father's daughter," she'd written. "But I hope you got your mother's brains. If you work hard, you'll go far. Come whenever you're ready." I'd been ready since the day I woke up with these memories. Second, I'd secured all my important documents: birth certificate, academic records, bank account information, everything I'd need. I'd opened a new bank account my parents didn't know about and had been funneling every bit of money I could earn into it. tutoring neighbor kids, selling my art online, taking odd jobs. By graduation, I had enough for several months of living expenses even without Aunt May's offer. Third, I'd covered my tracks. I'd made sure Chen thought he was supposed to pick me up. I'd confirmed with my parents that they expected him to do it. I'd acted excited about coming home, about celebrating with the family. I'd played the role perfectly because I needed them to forget me one last time. I needed them to prove definitively and without question that they'd never cared. I needed to burn this bridge myself with full knowledge that I was doing it. In my first life, I'd always wondered if I was being too sensitive, too demanding. If maybe they did love me and I just didn't see it. This time, I'd know for certain. So when Chen didn't show up at the station, and I knew he wouldn't, he never did, I didn't call him, I didn't call anyone. I let my phone die naturally. I sat there for 3 hours, visible to anyone who might have cared enough to check the station's security cameras, to call the station directly, to wonder where I was. No one wondered. At 11:47, I boarded the train to Shanghai with my one-way ticket and my small suitcase containing everything I actually cared about. I left behind the huge suitcase they'd given me, filled with old clothes and junk, sitting on the platform like a decoy. As the train pulled away, I watched my hometown's lights fade into darkness. I felt nothing but relief. Aunt May met me at Shanghai Station at 2 a.m. despite the ungodly hour. She was exactly as I'd remembered from my previous life, 60-something, impeccably dressed with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Lin Shu?" she asked, though she clearly knew it was me. "Yes, Aunt May, thank you for—" She held up a hand. "Save it, you look exhausted. Let's get you home and we'll talk in the morning." Her apartment was in a high-rise in Pudong, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Huangpu River. It was beautiful and modern, and nothing like the cluttered, chaotic house I'd grown up in. She showed me to a small guest room. "This is yours as long as you need it. We'll discuss work arrangements tomorrow. For now, sleep." I wanted to thank her, to explain, to pour out the whole story, but I was suddenly so tired I could barely stand. I managed to bow in a whispered thank you before she left me alone. I collapsed on the bed and slept for 12 hours straight. When I woke, it was late afternoon. My phone, which I'd charged overnight, had 47 missed calls and 89 text messages. I read through them with the detachment of someone watching a play they'd already seen. Chen's messages started around midnight. "Where are you? Shu, I'm at the station. Where are you?" "This isn't funny." He was lying, of course. He wasn't at the station. In my first life, I'd learned he'd actually been at a bar until 2 a.m., then gone home and passed out. These messages were sent from his bed, a panicked attempt to cover his tracks when my parents had finally noticed I wasn't home. My mother's messages were variations on a theme. "Why aren't you answering?" "Where are you?" "This is very inappropriate, Lin Shu. You're worrying your father." My father had sent exactly one text, "Come home immediately." Then around 3 a.m., the messages changed tone. Someone had checked the station's cameras or called the station or somehow figured out what had happened, as Chen. "Why did you get on a train? Where are you going? Mom and Dad are freaking out." "Mother." "Lin Shu, what is the meaning of this? You come home right now." "Father, your behavior is unacceptable. You are grounded indefinitely." And then, as the sun rose and I didn't respond, they shifted again. "Chen. Okay, you're obviously upset about something. Just tell us what we did wrong and we can fix it." "Mother. This is very childish, Lin Shu. Whatever you think we've done, running away is not the answer." "Father. If you're trying to manipulate us, it won't work. Come home and face the consequences of your actions." I read every message twice, looking for the one that said, "Are you safe?" Or "Are you okay?" Or "Yalni," or "We love you." Those messages didn't exist. Instead, I found exactly what I'd expected: annoyance, accusations, and attempts to reassert control. Not one person had asked if I was hurt or scared or needed help. They'd jumped straight to anger that I'd disrupted their lives. I deleted every message and blocked all their numbers. Then I got dressed and went to find Aunt May. She was in her home office working on a laptop despite it being Sunday. She looked up when I knocked. Feeling better? She asked. Yes, thank you. Aunt May, I need to be honest with you about something. She gestured for me to sit. I figured you might. Go ahead. I prepared this speech carefully. My family isn't what they seem. My parents neglect me. My brother actively sabotages me. They've made it clear I'm not a priority, and I don't think that will ever change. I'm not running away from responsibility. I'm leaving a situation that's hurting me. But I understand if that changes your offer, or if you feel I'm bringing drama into your life. I just wanted you to know the truth. Aunt May studied me for a long moment. Then she said, Your father called me this morning. Did you know that? My stomach dropped. No. He and I haven't spoken in 30 years, but he somehow tracked down my number and called me at 6 a.m. to demand I tell him if you were here. He said you'd run away, that you were being irrational and dramatic, that I should send you home immediately if you showed up. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know where you were, and that if I did, I certainly wouldn't tell him. Then I told him if he ever called me again, I'd get a restraining order. She smiled slightly. He always was a pompous ass. I see that hasn't changed. Relief flooded through me. So, the job offer still stands? Lin Shu, I left home when I was 21 because my parents wanted me to marry a man I didn't love and give up my career ambitions. My brother, your father, took their side, said I was being selfish and bringing shame on the family. I haven't regretted leaving for a single day in 40 years. She leaned forward. The job stands. You start Monday. But I'm not doing this out of pity. I'm doing it because I remember what it's like to be a smart young woman and trapped in a family that can't see her value. Don't make me regret it. I won't, I promised. I'll work harder than anyone. I'll prove I deserve this chance. I know you will, she said. You look like someone with something to prove. Those are my favorite kind of employees. I worked like I was possessed, because in a way, I was. I had 5 years of knowledge from my previous life about what worked, what didn't, and what mattered in the marketing world. I knew which social media platforms would explode in popularity. I knew which trends would catch fire. I knew which campaigns would go viral and which would flop. But more than that, I was free. For the first time in either life, I wasn't fighting against constant sabotage and neglect. When I worked hard, I got results. When I had good ideas, people listened. When I succeeded, I was praised instead of resented. It was intoxicating. Aunt May's firm specialized in digital marketing for luxury brands. I started as her personal assistant, but within 3 months, I was contributing to campaign strategies. Within 6 months, I was leading my own projects. Within a year, I was the youngest senior account manager in the company. The clients loved me. I had an instinct for what would resonate with audiences because I'd literally seen it resonate before, and I was hungry to prove myself in a way that never came across as desperate, only passionate. My salary increased accordingly. By my 19th birthday, I was making more than my father did at his textile factory. By 20, I'd saved enough to put a down payment on my own apartment. Aunt May became the mentor I'd never had. She was tough but fair, demanding but supportive. She pushed me to be better and celebrated when I succeeded. She saw me as a person with potential, not an inconvenience to be managed. For 2 years, I didn't contact my family. I didn't explain myself or justify my choices. I simply vanished from their lives the way they'd wanted me to all along. But I kept track of them. It's easier than you might think to monitor people from a distance in the age of social media. Chen was active online, posting constantly about his life, his girlfriend, his struggles taking over the family business after my father suffered a minor stroke. My mother posted recipes and complaints about young people these days. My father didn't have social media, but he appeared in enough other people's posts that I could piece together his life. They were struggling. Not catastrophically, not yet, but the cracks were showing. The textile business was failing. Fast fashion and cheap imports had decimated their market share. Chen, for all his advantages, was not a good businessman. He made impulsive decisions, alienated clients, and spent money the company didn't have on flashy upgrades that didn't improve productivity. My father was sick and getting sicker. The stroke had slowed him down, and Chen was running the business into the ground. My mother was stressed, her posts shifting from recipes to thinly veiled complaints about her son and husband. And none of them ever mentioned me publicly. It was like I'd never existed. Perfect. I let them crumble slowly, naturally, under the weight of their own bad decisions. I didn't interfere. I didn't help. I just watched. And I planned. Because I'd learned something crucial in my previous life. My family's textile factory sat on extremely valuable land. The property had been in the family for 3 generations, bought when the area was industrial and cheap, but urban development had transformed the neighborhood into prime real estate. In my first life, the factory had been sold after my father's death to pay off debts, and the developer had made millions on the land. In this life, I was going to be that developer. On my 21st birthday, I took Aunt May to dinner at the finest restaurant in Shanghai. "Are you sure you can afford this?" she asked, though she knew very well I could. I'd been promoted to marketing director 6 months earlier with a salary that would have made my parents weep. "I'm celebrating," I said. I want to thank you for everything you've done for me." "You've earned every opportunity I've given you," she replied. "But I appreciate the gesture. So what's the real reason for this celebration?" I should have known I couldn't hide anything from her. "I'm buying a company," I said. Her eyebrows rose. "Oh, which one?" "A textile factory in my hometown. It's failing, and the owner is desperate." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Your father's company." "Former father," I corrected. "I haven't thought of him that way in 3 years." "And you're going to do what exactly? Shut it down? Destroy it? Force them into bankruptcy?" "No," I said. "I'm going to save it, but on my terms." She studied me carefully. "Revenge isn't always satisfying, Lin Shu." "This isn't revenge," I said, though we both knew I was lying. "It's justice. And good business. That land is worth 10 times what the business is. I'll offer them a fair price for the company, restructure it, and give the employees better jobs. Everyone wins. Everyone except your family." "They'll get more money than they deserve," I said. "And they'll have to watch me succeed where they failed." "That seems fair to me." Aunt May sipped her wine. "You've changed in 3 years. When you first arrived, you were wounded. Angry, but still hoping somehow that they'd come for you. Now you're healed," I suggested. "Dangerous," she finished. "But I suppose they earned that. Just be careful. Victory is hollow if you lose yourself achieving it." "I haven't lost myself," I assured her. I've found myself. This is who I always could have been if they hadn't spent 18 years trying to crush me." She raised her glass. "And then here's to becoming who you were meant to be." We clinked glasses, and I felt the final piece of my plan click into place. Acquiring the company took 6 months of careful maneuvering. First, I established myself as a serious buyer. I'd partnered with a real estate development firm that was interested in the land. Together, we had the capital and credibility to make a genuine offer. Second, I approached through intermediaries. My father didn't know I was behind the offer. The acquisition was structured through a holding company with a deliberately bland name. All negotiations were handled by lawyers and business managers. The offer was generous, more than the factory was worth as a going concern, but less than the land was worth if developed. It was the kind of offer a desperate man would take. And my father was desperate. Chen had run the business into the ground even faster than I'd anticipated. They were months behind on loans. Suppliers wouldn't ship materials without prepayment. Their best clients had left for competitors. The factory was hemorrhaging money. My father was in poor health and couldn't work full-time anymore. My mother was out of her depth trying to help manage things. Chen was in over his head and drowning fast. They needed this sale. The only sticking point was that Chen didn't want to sell. He was convinced he could turn things around, that he just needed more time, more money, more chances. He fought my father on it, argued that selling was giving up on the family legacy. But my father was practical above all else. He could see the writing on the wall. Better to sell now and get something than wait until bankruptcy meant they got nothing. The deal closed on a cold Tuesday in November. The factory, the equipment, the land, the brand name, all of it became property of New Horizon Holdings, which was, through several corporate layers, owned by me. I gave them 2 weeks to clear out their personal belongings and transition the remaining staff. And then I went home for the first time in 3 years. I drove into my hometown on a Friday afternoon in my new car, a modest but nice sedan, the kind successful young professional drives. Not flashy, but unmistakably quality. The factory looked worse than I'd expected. The paint was peeling, equipment sat rusting in the yard, the sign was half fallen down. Chen's car was parked in the lot, my father's too. I'd timed my visit for when I knew they'd be there, packing up the office. I parked and sat for a moment, preparing myself. The last time I'd seen them in person, I'd been 18 years old, wearing a cheap graduation dress, excited to be coming home. I'd thought they'd at least come to the ceremony. They hadn't. Now I was 21, wearing a designer suit that cost more than their monthly revenue, about to walk into their business as its new owner. The symmetry was almost poetic. I got out of the car and walked toward the office entrance. Through the window, I could see Chen and my father arguing about something, my mother standing to the side looking exhausted. I opened the door, they all turned. For a long moment, no one spoke. They stared at me like I was a ghost. I stared back and felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no residual love. They were strangers who happened to share some DNA with me. "Hi," I said calmly. "I'm Lin Shu, the new owner of this facility. I'm here to oversee the final transition." My mother gasped. My father went pale. Chen's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and then rage. "What the hell is this?" Chen demanded. "You're behind the buyout?" "I'm the primary stakeholder in the holding company, yes," I said. "Is there a problem? The sale was legal and fair market value." You disappeared for 3 years, and now you show up to steal our business?" His voice was rising. "I didn't steal anything. I bought it. You sold it. That's how business works." My father finally found his voice. "Lin Shu, what is the meaning of this? Why would you do this to your own family?" "My family?" I repeated. "Mr. Lin, I don't have a family. I have people who share my last name and who abandoned me at a train station 3 years ago without bothering to check if I was alive." "That was a misunderstanding," my mother interjected weakly. Chen forgot, I agreed. "Just like he forgot to submit my university applications. Just like he forgot to pass along messages from my scholarship committee. Just like he forgot I existed every single time it was convenient for him." Chen's face flushed. "That's not, I never—" "Save it," I cut him off. "I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here for a business transition. You have until next Friday to remove your personal belongings. After that, anything left becomes property of New Horizon Holdings." "You can't do this," my father said. "This factory has been in our family for 3 generations, and you're the generation that lost it," I said bluntly. "You ran it into the ground through poor management and worse business decisions. I'm not punishing you. The market punished you. I'm just the buyer who saw an opportunity." "We raised you," my mother cried. "We fed you, clothed you, gave you a home." "You did the bare minimum required by law," I said. "And now I'm doing the bare minimum required by our contract. Be grateful I'm not suing you for the college fund you liquidated without my permission, or the inheritance you promised and then stole." The room was silent except for my mother's quiet crying. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. In some versions, I yelled. In others, I cried. In still others, I delivered a perfectly crafted speech about every hurt they'd ever inflicted. But standing there, looking at them, I realized I didn't need any of that. They were small. They'd always been small. Small-minded, small-hearted, small people who'd never seen beyond their own immediate wants. And I had become so much more than they could ever imagine. "Goodbye," I said simply. "I'll have my property manager coordinate the transition." I turned to leave. "Wait," Chen called. "Wait. Wait, what are you going to do with the factory?" I paused at the door. "I'm tearing it down. The land is worth more than the business. There's a luxury residential development planned for this area. I've already partnered with the developers." You're destroying everything we built? My father's voice cracked. No, I corrected. Impali. I'm building something new where you failed. There's a difference. But the workers, the employees, my mother started, will be offered positions with the development company or generous severance packages, I finished. I'm not a monster, despite what you might think. I actually care about people who depend on me. The implication hung in the air. Lin Shu, my father said, and for the first time, I heard something that might have been remorse in his voice. Were we really so terrible to you? I looked at him for a long moment. The stroke had aged him. He looked tired and small and genuinely confused. In my previous life, I would have softened. I would have said it wasn't so bad, that I understood, that I forgave them. But I'd spent 3 years learning to value myself, and I knew now that forgiveness without accountability was just enablement. Yes, I said simply. You forgot me at a train station and didn't notice for hours. You liquidated my college fund without asking. You let Chen sabotage me at every turn because it was easier than dealing with sibling rivalry. You treated me like I was worthless, and then you were surprised when I left. So yes, you were terrible. And I'm done pretending you weren't. I left before they could respond. The demolition took 3 months. I made sure they knew about every step of the process. Not to be cruel, or not just to be cruel, but because they needed to see what I'd built from their ashes. The old factory came down, and in its place rose a beautiful residential complex. Luxury apartments with modern amenities, green spaces, community areas. It was called the Shoe Gardens, a name the developers had suggested as a nod to the area's textile history, not knowing the personal significance. I didn't correct them. The project was successful beyond anyone's expectations. The apartments sold out before construction was even complete. My profit on the deal was substantial, enough that I could have retired at 22 if I'd wanted to. But I didn't want to retire. I wanted to build. I used the profits to start my own development and investment company. Aunt May came on as an advisor and minority partner. Within a year, we had 3 projects running simultaneously. Within 2 years, I was being profiled in business magazines as one of the city's most promising young entrepreneurs. My company specialized in urban revitalization, taking failing industrial sites and transforming them into mixed-use developments that served the community while generating profit. It was good work that made money, the best of both worlds. I made sure every article, every interview, every business profile mentioned that I was from a modest background, that I'd started with nothing, that I'd built everything myself from scratch. I knew Chen would read them. I knew my parents would see them. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd thrown away. Chen tried to contact me 6 months after the factory sale. He showed up at my office building. Somehow he'd figured out where I worked and tried to talk his way past security. They called me to ask what they should do. Tell him I'm not available, I said. And if he comes back, call the police. He left, but he tried other methods. Emails to my work account. Messages through mutual acquaintances from high school. He even tried to contact Aunt May. Each message was some variation on the same theme. He was sorry. He wanted to make amends. Family was family. Couldn't we move past this? None of them acknowledged what he'd actually done. None of them took real responsibility. I ignored them all. My mother tried too, in her way. She sent a letter to Aunt May's address. Somehow she'd figured out the connection, talking about how she'd always loved me, how she'd never meant to neglect me, how she hoped I could forgive her. The letter was 3 pages long and mentioned my feelings exactly once. The rest was about how hurt she was, how difficult things had been for her, how unfair it was that I was holding grudges. I filed it away without responding. My father was the last to reach out, and his attempt was the most pragmatic. He sent a formal letter through his lawyer asking if I would be willing to provide them with a loan to help them get back on their feet. They'd lost the house after the factory sale. They'd mortgaged it for operating capital that Chen had burned through, and were living in a small apartment. He asked for enough money to make a down payment on a new house and start a small business. The letter was businesslike and formal. It didn't mention our relationship. It treated me like a potential investor, not a daughter. That, somehow, was the most honest communication I'd ever received from him. I had my lawyer send back a formal rejection. 2 years after the factory sale, I was having dinner with Aunt May when she asked me something I'd been avoiding thinking about. Are you happy, Lin Shu? I looked up from my wine. What do you mean? Of course I'm happy. Look at everything I've accomplished. That's not what I asked, she said gently. I asked if you're happy. Not successful, not accomplished. Happy. I considered the question honestly. I had money. I had success. I had respect. I had proven beyond any doubt that I was more capable, more intelligent, more driven than Chen or anyone else in my family had ever dreamed. But was I happy? I'm content, I said finally. I'm at peace. I'm free. That's not the same as happy, Aunt May observed. Shu, you've built an empire out of spite. And don't get me wrong, it's an impressive empire and the spite was well earned. But at some point, you have to build something out of joy instead. I have joy, I protested. I love my work. I love what I've created. You love your success, she corrected. But do you love your life? Do you have friends? Do you date? Do you do anything that isn't about proving you're better than people who don't matter anymore? Her words stung because they were true. I'd spent 5 years, 3 in this life and 2 in the previous one, fighting to escape my family's shadow. And I'd succeeded. But somewhere along the way, I'd defined myself entirely by that fight. What do you suggest? I asked. Stop checking their social media, she said bluntly, Tom. Stop structuring your life around showing them what they lost. You've proved your point 1,000 times over. Now prove something to yourself, that you can be happy without needing them to witness it. I sat with that for a long moment. They never apologized properly, I said finally. They never really acknowledged what they did. They never will, Aunt May said. Some people aren't capable of that level of self-reflection. You can wait forever for an apology that means something, or you can accept that you'll never get it and move on anyway. Moving on feels like letting them win. Moving on is how you win, she countered. Right now, they still have power over you. Not because you need them or depend on them, but because you're still defining yourself in opposition to them. True freedom is when they become irrelevant. When you build a life so full and rich that you forget to check if they're watching. I knew she was right. I'd known for a while. How do I do that? I asked. You start small, she said. You join a book club or a hiking group or a cooking class. You say yes when people ask you out. You make friends who don't know anything about your past and don't care. You build a life that belongs to you, not to your trauma. That sounds hard. It is, she agreed. It's much harder than revenge. But it's also much more rewarding. I took her advice. It was awkward at first. I'd spent so long being driven and focused and goal-oriented that I'd forgotten how to just exist. How to do things for enjoyment rather than achievement. I joined a painting class, not to win competitions like I had in high school, but just to make art. I went to networking events and actually networked instead of just collecting contacts. I said yes when a colleague asked if I wanted to join her gym, and I stopped checking my family's social media. That was the hardest part. I'd grown addicted to tracking their decline, to seeing evidence that they were struggling while I soared. Giving that up felt like giving up a piece of my victory. But Aunt May was right. Every time I checked, every time I saw that Chen's newest business venture had failed or that my parents had moved to an even smaller apartment, it didn't make me happy. It just made me feel hollow. So I blocked them. All of them. I deleted the bookmarks, the saved searches, the Google alerts I'd set up. And slowly, gradually, I started to feel lighter. I made friends. Real friends, not just professional contacts. I dated, awkwardly at first, then more confidently. I took vacations that weren't working trips. I read books that had nothing to do with business. I learned to cook and discovered I was terrible at it but enjoyed it anyway. I built a life. And somewhere in the process of building that life, something shifted. I realized that I hadn't thought about my family in 3 weeks. Not once. Not to gloat, not to compare, not to plan further revenge. They'd simply faded. Like background noise I'd finally learned to tune out. That's when I knew I'd really won. The final chapter of my story with my family came unexpectedly, 5 years after I'd left them at that train station. I was 23, the age I'd been when I died in my previous life, and I was at a charity gala for a children's education fund I'd established. The fund provided resources and support for kids from neglectful homes, helping them access opportunities their families wouldn't provide. It was deeply personal work that I'd funded anonymously at first, but I'd recently gone public as the founder because I wanted to use my story to inspire others. Not the whole story, just the parts about overcoming adversity and building something from nothing. I was talking to a donor when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, and there was Chen. He looked terrible. Older than his 28 years, with dark circles under his eyes and cheap, ill-fitting clothes. He'd lost weight, and not in a healthy way. "Shoo," he said. "Please, I just need 5 minutes." My first instinct was to call security, but something in his face stopped me. He didn't look angry or entitled. He looked broken. "You have 5 minutes," I said, leading him to a quiet corner. "Starting now." "I'm sorry," he said immediately. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I was awful to you. I know I ruined your life." "You didn't ruin my life," I interrupted. "You made it harder, but I built something anyway. If anything, you motivated me." He flinched. I guess that's fair, but Shu, I need help. Mom's sick. Dad had another stroke. We have nothing left. I've tried everything, every job, every scheme, and I just can't. I'm not good at this, at life, at making things work. And I know I have no right to ask, but you're doing so well, and I thought maybe you thought I'd give you money," I finished. "A loan," he corrected quickly. I'd pay you back, I promise. I just need a chance to what? Start another business you'll run into the ground? Gamble it on another sure thing investment? Chen, you've had chances, millions of them. You had every advantage I never had, and you wasted all of it." "I know," he said, and his voice cracked. "I know, okay? I know I'm a failure. I know I'm useless. I know you're better than me. You've always been better than me. That's why I tried to hold you back, because I knew if you ever got a real chance, you'd outshine me so completely that everyone would see what I really am." It was the first honest thing he'd ever said to me. "So you admit it," I said. "You sabotaged me deliberately." "Yes," he whispered. "I sabotaged you. I lied to your boyfriend. I destroyed your university papers. I took your rent money. I did all of it, and I knew what I was doing, and I convinced myself it was okay because you were my little sister, and you should be helping me, not competing with me." "And Mom and Dad, did they know?" "No, they just didn't care enough to notice. They wanted to believe I was the golden child, so they ignored anything that didn't fit that story. When you left, they convinced themselves you were being dramatic and ungrateful. It was easier than admitting they'd failed you. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired." "Chen," I said slowly, "I'm not going to give you money." His face fell, but he nodded like he'd expected it. "But," I continued, "I'll do something else. My company has an entry-level position open in facilities management. It's not glamorous. You'll be doing inspections, coordinating with contractors, dealing with maintenance issues. The pay is decent, but not great. You'll report to managers who are younger than you and more educated than you. You'll have to work hard and prove yourself every single day. There are no shortcuts, no special treatment. Can you handle that?" He stared at me. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," I corrected. "One chance. You mess up, you're fired. You try to take advantage of our relationship, you're fired. You do anything to undermine me or my company, you're fired, and I'll make sure no one else in this industry hires you either. But if you show up every day and do the work, you'll have a stable job with benefits and a path to advancement. And I'll help arrange for a visiting nurse for Dad and assistance with Mom's medical bills. Not a handout, a payment plan you'll work off. Why? He asked. Why would you do this for me after everything I did? I thought about that. Because holding on to anger was poisoning me, I said finally. Because I built my entire life around escaping you and proving you wrong. And I won. I won so completely that there's no question anymore. And now I get to choose what kind of person I want to be going forward. I can be the person who lets you rot, or I can be the person who offers a hand to someone who's drowning, even if they deserve to drown. I don't deserve this, he said. No, I agreed. You don't. But I deserve to be the kind of person who offers it anyway. This isn't for you, Chen. This is for me. So I can look at myself in the mirror and know that I broke the cycle, that I became better than our parents, better than their favoritism and neglect, better than the cruelty they taught you. He was crying now, silent tears running down his face. There's one condition, I added. You go to therapy, real therapy. You deal with whatever made you into someone who could hurt his own sister for years without remorse. You figure out how to be a better person. And until you do that work, we have a professional relationship only. Maybe someday we can be something else, but you have to earn that. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'll do it, all of it. Thank you, Shu. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said. Prove me right first. That was 3 years ago. Chen did prove me right, though it took time. He showed up to work every day. He did the grunt work without complaining. He went to therapy weekly. He moved our parents into a modest but comfortable assisted living facility and visited them regularly. He paid back every yuan I'd spent on their care, on schedule, even when it meant he had nothing left for himself at the end of the month. Slowly, over years, he became someone I could respect. Not love, I'm not sure I'll ever love him, but respect. My parents are still alive, both in declining health. I visit them occasionally, brief visits where we discuss the weather and their medical care, but nothing deeper. They're strangers who need help, and I provide it because I can, not because they deserve it. My mother once tried to apologize, a rambling attempt at explaining all the reasons she'd failed me. I'd stopped her midway through. I'm not interested in explanations, I'd said. I'm past needing them. You were the parent you were. I became who I am anyway. Let's leave it at that. She'd cried, but she'd nodded. My father never apologized. I think he still doesn't fully understand what he did wrong. That's fine. I don't need him to understand. I'm not waiting for his approval anymore. Today is my 26th birthday, and I'm celebrating it with friends at a restaurant I partly own. Aunt May is here, of course, holding court at one end of the table. My girlfriend is here, making everyone laugh with her terrible jokes. My team from work is here. People I met through hobbies. People who became my family by choice rather than by blood. Chen is here too, sitting quietly at the far end. We're not close, but we're cordial. He's dating someone nice who seems good for him. He's been promoted twice. He's building a life. I look around the table at all these people who chose to be here, who care about me not because they have to, but because they want to. And I feel something I haven't felt since I was very young. I feel loved. Not the desperate, grasping love of someone trying to earn scraps, not the hollow victory of someone who's proven a point, but the warm, steady love of someone who knows their own worth and has built a life that reflects it. The train I took that night 3 years ago carried me away from a family that never valued me. But it carried me towards something better, a life I built myself, with people who see me, who celebrate me, who would never forget me at a train station because they actually care that I exist. I raise my glass. To new beginnings, I say. To new beginnings, everyone echoes. And for the first time in either life, I am genuinely, completely happy. Not because I destroyed my family, though I did that too. Not because I succeeded, though I did that as well, but because I built something beautiful from ashes, and I did it on my own terms. The train carried me away from a life of being forgotten, and it carried me toward a life of being unforgettable. That's the real victory.